I am not somebody who works on business strategy. I'm a political scientist who works largely on governance, and a lot of my work on governance relates to the regulation of industry. I also believe that my predecessors have done a remarkable job of introducing the VUCA world. So I will make my intervention in the sense and with the conviction that whether or not you are in or outside the VUCA world, there are certain issues regarding governance which face the corporate sector that require immediate and considerable attention. So it is in that spirit that I will make my remarks. First and foremost, I believe that there has been an industrial transformation in India. If you agree with me, then I think it's important to locate why that industrial transformation happened. So my first set of thoughts will take you back into history and urge you to think more deeply about the relationship between state and business that produced this industrial transformation. Thereafter, I think both business and the state became complacent. And I think both the state and business face formidable challenges. Some of the challenges can be understood by thinking about how one can overcome the VUCA world, but some of the challenges that reside inside of India are considerable. And I will very parsimoniously point to some of those challenges. And finally, industrial and economic growth cannot be divorced from the element of overall development. So I would like to talk a little bit about the relationship between economic and industrial growth and overall Indian development. Because what we see today as happening in India is that the voters want redistribution and business is unhappy. So is there a way to deal with this contradiction? Because not only are we living in a VUCA world, we are living in a world of democratic politics which has certain ramifications for the relationship between state and social actors like the business class. I draw some of these remarks from a book which will soon be published in February of 2014. It's titled The Oxford India Short Introduction to the Political Economy of Reforms in India. I realize that there is no Q&A and this presentation will be very short. So if you want further elaboration on some of these arguments, I will refer you to a book which is actually written for a larger audience. It is not written for economists or political scientists. We can have that'll be great. So when talking about the relationship between the state and the business class, as it approaches the issue of industrial development and economic growth, I think we have to understand and respect that the Indian story is very different from the East Asian or the Southeast Asian story. While the state works very closely with the business class, the state does not produce winners as it did in Japan, as it did in South Korea, as it did in Singapore. So this is a state which is pretty much an important actor. It's a very, very important animal in the zoo. But it's not the same kind of an animal that you see in other parts of Asia, which have developed very rapidly. Now, often this leads to an understanding and a confusion that the state in India is non-existent, or that you can only do things when the state doesn't look at you. That opinion, I think, is pretty much not the case. To give you one example, Infosys would not have been what it is today if 1991 has not happened. In 1990, for example, the story goes that the board members of Infosys got together and said that they were not getting a bang for the buck. So they really wanted to dissolve and sell the company. This is despite the fact that in all of the 1980s, a number of policy changes had happened which were favorable towards the information technology sector. But those policy changes were not good enough. At one point in time, Mr. Narayan Murthy, it is said, told his colleagues that, look, if you guys want to sell the company, I'll buy it up. And then he's on record having said that 1991 happened. Tata would not have bought Chorus if 1991 had not happened. India would not have had its telecom revolution if 1991 had not happened. So how did 1991 happen? Did 1991 happen because of the business class? Research suggests that 1991 and the revolutionary changes in the policy framework that happened largely because of the state and the technocrats who resided within the state. In fact, I have argued in my book that if you have to understand how tectonic shifts happen in policy, you really have to understand the evolution of ideas within the state. So the entire period of the 1980s is a period when the Indian state begins criticizing the old import substituting policies that had inhabited the policy environment. There are a number of reports within the government of India that say that you need foreign direct investment, that you need to promote exports, that the Monopolies and Restrictive Trade Practices Act is a problematic act, that the public sector actually has to be freed from the government to a much greater extent. Now, not only were there new ideas that were getting consolidated, Mrs. Indira Gandhi, through her industrial policy statement of 1980, and subsequently Rajiv Gandhi, did a substantial amount of groundwork, however imperfectly, often failing and flailing, wherein they tried to introduce changes. So when we look at the shock of 1991, I really call it a tipping point. And the difference between a tipping point and any other kind of change is that the tipping point model of change is like the earthquake model of change. So what happens in an earthquake? In an earthquake, what happens is that tectonic shifts are taking place over a period of time, and suddenly you get an earthquake. When you get an earthquake, you think that something substantial has happened. It almost feels like a meteor has hit the earth. But the way in which that change has actually happened is an evolutionary manner. Tectonic changes are taking place over a considerable period of time, and seismologists know that there could be an earthquake.